Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 784. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, we feature our interview with Michaele Gardner and Brian Hackerson. We talked about Agile Best Self. We also, and perhaps more importantly, discuss being in control of yourself so you can truly deliver value to those around you. As we start to close out 2023, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to reflect on how you can be your best self. Michaele Gardner started out as a counselor at an emergency crisis line. Clients were too messy. Clear inputs did not lead to predetermined outputs, so she moved into the world of IT and has not looked back. Becoming a developer on an XP team brought together her interest in psychology, flow, teamwork, and problem solving. She quickly realized that many teams and organizations poured their hearts and souls into projects that added little value. Her next natural step was to help engineers and organizations understand business value at a micro and a macro level. At all levels, Michaele loves giving change agents tools to define their own why and stay emotionally resilient. Brian Hackerson is the co-creator of the Agile Best Self mindset, the vice president of people operations and enterprise agile coach at Scrum Inc., an innovator at the intersection of agile practices and personal development. Brian has revolutionized team engagement and performance in various leadership roles. His approach uniquely blends professional growth with personal empowerment, embodying his belief in the transformative power of aligning individual journeys with agile principles. Links to both Brian and Michaele's LinkedIn profiles in the show notes and to the Agile Best Self site. Michaele Gardner, Brian Hackerson, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thanks, Tom.
Yay, we're glad to be here and super great to follow up on our initial meeting at Agile 2023.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you made it through that last bout of COVID that you got. So, and you know, that sucks to bring that back from a good conference. I did it the year before. So, tag, you're it. So maybe the next year you'll go, Brian, and you can bring COVID home. Just saying.
Well, I'm all about breaking trends, so that'll be my approach.
You know, I'm with you. That's a good trend to break. So, you both are founded. Let's just start with what is Agile Best Self? What does that really mean?
Well, Brian and I met at the Global Scrum Gathering in Minneapolis, and was that 2018, Brian? And one of the common conversations we have at any conference we go to, in fact, Tom, I think you and I had this conversation at Agile 2023, that we're surrounded by a bunch of like-hearted individuals, and we kind of fill up our emotional gas tank and our emotional resiliency tank when we go to conferences, because we're surrounded by people where we don't have to justify our existence. It's a group of people that we're all going through the same struggles, but possibly in slightly different ways. And just like a lot of conference friendships, Brian and I said, hey, we should do something for a conference, which I have dozens of these conversations at conferences, but because Brian and I live in the same city, we actually, and also because he's persistent and I'm the social butterfly, we wound up working together a little bit. He invited me to come speak at his company's first global Scrum gathering. I was the keynote speaker at that event. And we just continued to stay in touch. And we landed on the problem statement, not immediately, but we landed on the problem statement of who takes care of the change agents? Because we spend so much time taking care of our families, taking care of our teams, taking care of others, but how can we come up with a way that we can create this sense of community outside of conferences? And how can we give back to the Agile community? And when we looked at the 12 Agile principles, we said, wait a minute, these principles are team focused. We love them. They're fabulous. But what do we do if we were to turn that lens inward towards ourselves as change agents. And that's how the Agile Best Self principles were born. Brian, what would you like to add to that story? Because you always add some great flavor and context.
Yeah, I think that the thing I would add to that, or maybe put in the boldface type, if you will, is it started out as a way to put ourselves into service to this community that has given us so much. And it was born out of, I remember it was a pretty dark day when we met. If you recall, Michaele, at that conference, we had an April blizzard. No, or is it a May blizzard? It was something like that.
April blizzard. Yep.
Even for Minnesota, it was a little on the
It
unexpected
snows in Minnesota? Wow.
Tom, you've lived here.
I know.
Me
being funny.
I know. You're yanking our chain. Love it.
And then at the same time, Michaele and I brought our various challenges that were going on. And one of the thoughts that occurred to me and why I was so persistent was, if we, with intention, put ourselves into service to the community, it may have the after effect of helping ourselves and our own stuff, right? And to bring us to a healthier place. And for me, I could say with great confidence, that's exactly what happened. And when we got our sort of first public validation in the spring of 2019 at a local event here in the Twin Cities, where the response was both by the number of people that showed up to hear what we were talking about and their response when we finished, it suddenly changed from, hey, this is kind of a fun little thing that we're doing to give a little bit back to the community, to now we, at that moment, realized we hit something. We struck a chord. We hit something that folks wanted to talk about, wanted to explore. And so then it turned into a calling. And then, as they say, the rest is history. We just kept going. And here we are today.
And Brian, I remember that first meetup that we thought it would have an impact, because when we were talking to our local community that Brian and I are very actively engaged in, a lot of people are like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. I think it was Bill Ash that said, I'm not sure why this works, but it does. Both of us were, I think, very surprised to get a standing ovation at a meetup. Standing ovation complete with people clapping and cheering. And I still remember that moment. I'm feeling activated right now. And starting with that small, energizing movement, going to giving our workshops at large Fortune 50 companies, leading to our first paid gig where we were paid a significant amount of money to show up and share our message, because the corporate sponsors that hired us, they said, this is important and it's worth sharing this message, because by that time we were in the pandemic, people were on lockdown, massive levels of burnout, disengagement, and corporations were starting to take notice that we have to actively and intentionally give people the tools that make sense for them in order to combat burnout and to help them stay engaged. It's not only smart from a corporate business sense, it's also the human thing to do.
I would say even today, we like to think ourselves past the pandemic days, but some of the junk that kind of came up during that in the world we live in general hasn't gone away. And in fact, in some cases, it's gotten even more challenging when you think about, hey, we didn't all go return to work like we thought we were going to after a couple of weeks. Now we've got hybrid, work environments and things that it created a whole bunch of new challenges. And so I think this work really helps. I mean, I think about the number of people that suffer from things, just simple loneliness, even though they be sitting on Zoom calls all day. but feeling terribly alone because, the lack of connection. And so we think this framework helps and gives something to lean on to kind of get the ability to try something different intentionally, to kind of change our outlook and our outcomes.
So when you gave this presentation, the one that you got the standing O, and people clapped, all of the good things, right? And yeah, that sounds pretty wicked. What was the nerve that you touched?
I think in a way we articulated a framework that was intuitive to Agilists, because most Agilists are already familiar with the 12 Agile principles. And we put the lens back on the individuals and recognize the fact that being a change agent is tough and it's lonely work. And it's something that it's a pain and a frustration and a joy that only change agents understand. You're beating your head against the wall, or that's what it feels like. And then there's a moment where you can break through and you realize that we're all in this together and we can help each other and we can do it in a way that's outside of conferences. One of our Agile Best Self principles is engage your trusted circle daily. That's critical. Who's in your circle? Who isn't in your circle? And we helped broaden that community of your trusted circle. We have another principle that's around interacting with your like-hearted community, not your like-minded. If you interact with a like-minded group of people, you're in an echo chamber. That's why we talk about being engaged in a like-hearted community, because there's enough food for thought when everybody doesn't think exactly the same thing, but we understand the same concepts: empathy, psychological safety, active listening, just being there for others. I think there were a lot of nerves that we touched on a lot of different levels with a lot of different people. And we also have very strong connections within our local community. So we knew many of the pain points and frustrations that these people were going through. Brian, what do you think?
I was thinking about it a little differently. It touched my nerve in that it felt like, yeah, I do have a voice here. And we have a voice together that will make a difference in other people's lives. And so it was, I just remember walking out to the car after, when we walked out to our cars after it was over, and it's like, okay, everything just changed for us. And not just for us, but for the community, because, okay, now we're in it in a way we weren't before.
I like the touched a nerve metaphor or analogy, because Brian and I, in our work, we talk about the concept of activation. And when I get activated, it's a somatic response. My body responds in a way that I'm feeling more connected with people around me and whatever conversation is happening. So I get activated when I get goosebumps on my arms. I can feel them right now. Brian gets activated because you feel it across the back of your neck. And right. We've had this conversation in enough workshops with enough people that we know that there are other people that feel a somatic response. No matter, it may be a different response, but it literally is connecting kind of your mind, your heart, and the rest of your body together. And once you get in that alignment, there's absolutely no stopping somebody that has access to that kind of power.
How do you define no stopping?
That's a great question. We're not sure yet, because we're not sure where we've come up against things. Now, I'll answer that question by answering a slightly different question, or making a different comment. Brian and I think it was about 1.5 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, we had utilized our principles and practices to the point where we got what we wanted out of life. I had just recently gotten divorced, and because I went through the practice of being mindful and intentional. Nothing bad to say about my ex-husband, but we did not bring out the best in each other. So that violated our first principle of our highest priority is to be our best selves, to enable others to be their best selves. So I got to be single by choice for 1.5 years, and it was great. I enjoyed it. Things in Minnesota were on lockdown. I couldn't go anywhere or do anything anyway. So I really enjoyed that personal space that I had. Then I decided to go back into the world of dating, which was really interesting in your 50s, dating online. I think the phrase goat rodeo sums it up quite nicely. Not that anybody that I met online was a goat, but anyone that's grown up on a farm like me, putting the concept of goat and rodeo together. Thank you for my friend Martin Polrang for exposing me to that concept. That was the year that through one of our workshops that we give, we have people define what their intention is for any given time frame. My intention was optimism, which is a great place to start if you're going into the world of online dating. And I eventually, through using our principles as well as human system dynamic principles, am in a great relationship now. And I guarantee you, if I were to describe my boyfriend to myself 2 years ago, because we've been dating a little over 1 year, I would have been like, how in the world did you end up with someone like that? But I wound up with the person that I need to be with right now, and really am happy and grounded in this current relationship. So I stepped away from the Agile Best Self work. Brian has a different story, but it also brings him to the point where he was very happy and fulfilled in his life. So he stepped away from the Agile Best Self work. So one of the commonalities that Brian and I both have is that we get engaged and disengaged with our work based on whether or not we need it at the time. We can go back to the work that we're doing, and it's always there for us. Kind of like a trusted friend that you call up that you haven't talked to for 1.5 years. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I really need to speak to this person because I've lost my way a little bit, or I need to get back into the work because, yet again, there may be something that I'm working through where I can use the guardrails of a framework to help me get the outcomes that I would like or that I wish for, so that I can start to define what is stopping me. What does awesome look like? How big of a stage do I want to be on? So I can't answer that question of what does no stopping look like, because I don't think I'm ever going to get there. And I think that's part of the fun. Brian, what story do you want to tell around that question?
I like that description a lot, and it certainly resonates with me. And, for me, it was about having the boldness, which was kind of my big intention of stepping away from a career and going into a smaller organization, more purpose-driven, to try to affect the world of work. And I'm working now as a leader at Scrum Inc. And so that's been a real big change. And now that I've been at that for over a couple of years right now, and then all the other things going on, my nest is empty now, and so it's my wife and I here, and coming out of this post-pandemic world, maybe I don't know if we can call it that or not, but you know what I mean. The idea is, okay, so what's the sort of the next big intention? Where else can I be or apply boldness to my life? And I think the intention in the end is the same, meaning not stopping. Because one of the things that happened along the way in the last year is I lost my father after a long battle with Alzheimer's. that took up a lot of energy, to kind of be in a caregiving mode and stuff like that. And so now that I'm free of that obligation to, to have to, or, be consistently one of the caregivers for my dad. I don't have to do that anymore. And so now I found myself in a spot. It's like, okay, now what? And then going back to the work and saying, okay, today I'm going to lean into, a certain principle that happened. It was there waiting for me. What I liked about it is just like it did when we created it, it delivered. Talk about a nerve. I found the nerve again. And that was pretty cool.
And I love that, Brian, because anything that's going on in our lives, we can always bring it back to the Agile Best Self principles, because they are so generalized, but they're also so human. And I've heard people refer to some of our work sometimes as self-help. Well, this isn't really self-help. It's more of a framework that you reach into the goodie bag and you see what you need for any given time. And you really just kind of look at what's resonating the most in any particular moment. And then you use our sixth principle, which is being mindful and intentional. You're kind of looking at the framework, looking at the 12 principles and going, what do I need today? What do I need right now? I've always been pretty much into fitness and eating healthy. I try to eat vegan because of the health impact on me. But I'm not a huge fan of really strict things that say you have to walk 10,000 steps a day. You need to get up and see, be moving by this time of day. You need to see morning sunlight. You need to see evening sunlight. I try to do all of those things that are neuroscience based. But sometimes when I look at something that's overly prescriptive, I'm exhausted and I just want to go back to bed. Okay, how am I supposed to eat healthy, get 10,000 steps, spend at least an hour talking to friends, make sure that my work-life balance is good? By the time I get through that 20-point checklist, I'm exhausted. Our framework is more around, what do I need today? Do I need to stay in bed because I need a little bit of just decompression time? Or do I need to engage my trusted circle right now? Do I need to go hiking in Iceland because that's what I need to do at this point? Or do I need to skip that vacation because I'm feeling worn out? It's not prescriptive. It's very self-directed, and it gives you autonomy, but again, enough of a framework to say what is best for me in this moment. And that's why our first principle, just like the Agile principles, all other principles are in service to it. So, for example, just to reiterate, our first principle is our highest priority is to be our best self and enable others to be their best selves. For me, even though I'm more on the extroverted side of the Jungian framework of extrovert and introvert, sometimes I'm more of an ambivert, but sometimes I just need to sit in a dark room and be by myself. I'm fine with that because I know that sometimes I'm a little more introverted. Sometimes I'm a little more extroverted. So I like our framework because it allows you to decide, this is what my best self is right now in this moment. Brian and I will send each other texts frequently and say, how are you today? And Brian sometimes will say, okay. Well, guess what? It's okay to be okay. It's better to be authentic and talk about where you are than to put on this false face of I'm fabulous and great and everything's just fine when you can tell that it's not. So I really like the flexibility of our framework, and that if it doesn't resonate, you can step away from it. If you're going through a tough time in your life, step back into it.
I can see this being very relevant to individuals. Do organizations care about this anymore?
Today, given what we're hearing about quiet quitting, they should care. I'm not sure if they do.
Well, that's coupled with quiet firing too, which is perhaps even worse than, or at least more prevalent than quiet quitting.
Say more about quiet firing.
Pushing people to the side, pushing them into a place where they have to leave. It's just easier. Putting them off to the side. And arguably, right, before we turn the microphone on, we were assessing the whole idea of the Agile coaching world, right? And whether or not the ideas, some of the professional coaching stuff of just, whatever that is, and decoupling that from performance delivery, was a service to the coaching community. Organizations might view this as decoupled from performance. Do you see Agile Best Self decoupled from performance or not?
I see it absolutely intertwined with performance. And in one of our workshops where we help people come up with a one word or short phrase to basically have an anchoring adjective to tie back to, Brian came up with the word boldness. My word was optimism. You can actually use that to have a custom performance conversation with people around you or direct reports. So you can say things like, do you have an opportunity in your job to be bold? Or is there still optimism in your job, and how can you turn that in service to our organization? I mean, I definitely want a change agent who knows how to refill that optimism cup. This isn't different than StrengthsFinder. It isn't different than other frameworks that are out there. It just so happens that it's the framework that we use. And Brian, I know that you use this process of helping people come up with their keyword and use that to help have conversations around how can you really bring your best self to work in service of the company today. Are there any stories that you want to share about how these conversations helped people that you've worked with?
I think that, to build on what you just said, Michaele, what I like about the intention is there's sort of implication of authenticity there. When you kind of have that mini performance conversation, and it gets you going, and not just sort of says, I'm going to go in there and, be a bull in a china shop or something, where that's not you, right? You might, it'll get you ready to show up authentically because, I believe that, being you is the best thing that someone has to offer. Show up as yourself and bring your greatness, bring your gifts. And this helps me sometimes, I don't always remember to do it, but sometimes it just helps me get my mind right before I address, certain situations.
Brian's, one of his quotes is, how do I make the room better? Quote, how do I make the room better? End quote. And every time you've used that, Brian, you've seen some pretty powerful, unexpected results. And that definitely helps when you're in a state of leadership as well as being an individual contributor. And I think this remote work world that we live in right now, we tend to forget that we're interacting with other humans. We see faces, but there's almost less responsibility to make your organization a better place, your team a better place. And I've fallen victim to that also. I haven't always shown up as my best self at work. But I think we need even more tools nowadays with the quiet quitting, the quiet firing, the pushing people aside. Think of how many Zoom calls you're on where everybody has their camera off. I was on a call yesterday. There were 150 people on the call. Only 2 people had their cameras on. Yes, thank you, Tom, for turning your camera off. Now I feel absolutely disengaged. I'm not going to talk to y'all anymore. But it's almost, even when I go to in-person events now, the energy that I'm getting from the room is almost overwhelming. I was exhausted at Agile 2023 because being around that many people in one place, put on top of it that we're all there energized and thrilled to be there and looking for the next conversation, whether it's with Mike Cohen, you mentioned him earlier, doing a podcast with him, or seeing Alistair Coburn walk down the hall, or being in the same room with people that wrote the Agile Manifesto is amazing. So imagine, Tom, if you could take the energy that you see at a conference and apply it to a work environment. People would be ripping down the walls to work there. You would have such an incredible work environment. People would never leave, and they would show up and they would do their best work. So I can't see how people could decouple the concept of emotional resiliency, being excited about work, and benefit to your organization. I do a lot of work around OKRs, objectives and key results. One of the ways that we define the difference between an objective and a key result is that an objective is aspirational. It makes you want to jump out of bed in the morning, to give a really concrete example of what aspirational is. I can't see how organizations will continue to survive, much less flourish, until they start getting into some of these conversations and giving the people that they work with tool sets and specific ways that they can be more engaged. I mean, it's a great question, but that's why the answer is this is essential for this current work world we're in, especially with the younger generation. I'm in my 50s. I know what it's like to be at work every single day. I know what it's like from being a COBOL developer. I know what it's like to sleep under my desk and wake up with the same people that were in that building when you went to bed, because we'd have jobs that ran for 24 hours. It was just easier to take a nap under your desk for 4 or 5 hours, right? The current job market right now, when people are coming out of college, these younger individuals, the 23, 24, 25-year-olds, they are craving the connection with people because they didn't get it in school, especially if they were going to school remotely. Like Brian's son. Brian explained once what your son's experience was like at school. And I said, that sounds like he's in a prison cell because his floor was on lockdown because someone had contracted COVID. So meals were being delivered under the door and he was sitting in a room. You said the word cinder block, something to have to do with the way that the room was constructed. And I was like, that sounds like prison, not your freshman year at college. This is definitely something that we need. And I'll just wrap it up by saying, when I listened to a podcast, or it wasn't a podcast, it was the Agile Manifesto turns 20. And many of the thought leaders in the Agile space, they were talking about what's the next step for Agile. And a lot of people said, let's stop using the terms, but now it's really focusing on the humans in a way that we didn't realize when it was written in 2001. It's really getting to the heart of what it means to be a human in today's workforce and to bring your energy and passion to work. Anything you'd like to add, Brian?
I think that and set it in an Agile context again is it's not a kind of a turnkey flip the switch and suddenly everything's rainbows and unicorns. The idea with the framework, the way I like to think about it is, could I be a little bit better than I was the last iteration? Can I improve the product, which is me and my own journey? Can I do a little bit better? And I think over time is sort of when you see the real the big results, the meaningful results. So for what it's worth, I think that's why it connects so well with the ideas and practices of agility in the workplace.
That's wicked. Michaele, Brian, I know we could go on for a long time, and I've made a pact with myself that I will keep the podcast under 2 hours. So as we get ready to wrap, before we do, I always like to ask, if you woke up tomorrow morning, somebody handed you a magic wand and a cup of your caffeinated beverage of choice. Personally, me, it's, French press coffee, at least 4 or 5 gallons. So magic wand, your caffeine of the day, or, whatever you use to wake up. You had 2 wishes. that would make work better, what would those 2 wishes be and why?
Well, I'm going to take this one and say 2 wishes is for more kindness. And I'm going to say kindness to self as well as kindness to each other. And I just want more of that, please.
You get another one, Brian. Don't you get 2?
I thought he made that too.
I turned that into 2. Kindness to self and kindness to others.
Kindness to everybody.
You see, so that would have been 1, but he did it in a...
I'm always trying to get that 2-for-1 thing going out there.
BOGO.
Yeah, BOGO. I do work for a retailer, by the way. The way that I would answer the 2 wishes question, I wish that people had the ability to intuitively know how to be more emotionally resilient. I think that's wish number 1. I think it's really important for us to have ups and downs. When I was in high school, I remember listening to a story, a Greek mythology story about how sorrow and joy in Greek mythology are 2 sisters and they always walked hand in hand. And I didn't understand that. I understand it now. You need the highs and the lows to really experience life. Otherwise, you have anhedonia. And anhedonia is just lack of feeling. That's actually an indicator of depression. So I wish that people intuitively had more emotional resilience. And my second wish is that I wish more people could bring the concept of work and play together and more tightly couple it. And hopefully that would bring fun, that would bring kindness, that would bring flow. It would bring all of the things that we're looking for in life. And we've all had great days where we turn around and we're like, wow, I had so much fun at work today that I can't even believe I get paid. That's what I would do with my second wish. Our work is really all about tools that assist with emotional resilience. I think that's really, really critical.
So how could people continue the conversation? How could they learn more about the Agile Best Self? Obviously, they could go to Amazon and buy the book, but how else?
Well, please join us on our website, agilebestself.com, where you'll hear lots of stories from Michaele and I and our different experiences in applying these principles in a real context. And also on LinkedIn, we have a active community. Just look up Agile Best Self. Send us a request and we'll get you in the group right away. And, that's where we like to continue to see the conversation flourish.
It is a private community. The only reason we made it a private community is where whatever that John Cusack quote is in the movie Say Anything, we're not looking for anybody who's selling anything or anybody that wants to buy anything or anybody that wants any type of, and I know I'm butchering it, but anybody that wants to talk about politics or anybody that wants to talk about religion. That's the only reason it's a private community. There have been 1 or 2 people that we have removed because as soon as we've given them access, they're starting to try to sell courses. That is not the intent of that group. The intent is to create a like-hearted community that can have some lively discussions about things or have some heartfelt discussions about things. That's the only reason that it is curated. We've seen a couple of instances, even on Instagram or TikTok, where very small things become inflamed and, we don't want that to be part of our community. So that's the only reason why it's private. We also welcome people to be on our podcast. I have a list of people that I need to follow up with to be on our podcast. And Tom, you're on that list. I know that you just found that out, but we also look for people that are interested in giving guest posts on our website. Our website has readership in over 72 countries. When I pulled the data on that, I pulled it again because I was shocked. I said, I must have counted this wrong. So Tom, if you're going to to Iceland and you could possibly go to Greenland and log into our website when you're in Greenland, from a visual perspective, Greenland is such a huge chunk of the map. If you log in to our website from Greenland, we'll get like, I don't even know. We'll get the map will be filled in significantly greater. I wrote a post on this and I'm not doing a great job of explaining it.
Technically, Greenland isn't a country. Technically, if you've gotten listenership from Denmark, you may well have had Greenlandian people, since a lot of their servers are in Denmark, which is their home country. So the one I want is Antarctica. Wouldn't it be cool to have a listener or a reader from Antarctica?
That would be really cool. But Antarctica, if you think about the space it takes up on a map, it's only a blip. We're looking for Greenland because Greenland has, one person logs in from Greenland.
That may be a misinterpretation of the map too. So it'd be interesting to know.
I'm just looking for square footage.
I hear you. This has been marvelous. At the end of the podcast, I open up the podcast for you to promote anything that you'd like. So the platform, you guys have shared a lot of wonderful information with the listeners. The platform's yours. 2 to 3 minutes. Promote anything you like. I do need to point out the podcast has been around for 17 plus years. Selling your car on eBay, probably not the right platform for that, unless you want calls 17 years from now.
This is what I would like to promote. I would like to encourage people to sit down and think about what energizes you and what makes you happy and what makes you feel engaged. And if that works for you, great. If you want to follow our Agile Best Self community, see what we've done, great. What I really would like to proselytize is figure out what works best for you, because you only have 128 hours a week. That's it. Make the most of it and make sure you're maximizing the fun and the energy and engagement that you get. Could be our book, could be our podcast, could be something else, but it doesn't have to be about us. I want you to make time for yourself and make it about you. That's what I would like to say. Brian?
I think I don't think I could say any better than that, and I think that would be a great way to close. So today, Michaele gets the last word.
Michaele, Brian, thank you very much. This was absolutely wonderful. In Reread Saturday News, Chapter 11 of Leadership as Language, The Hidden Power of What You Say and What You Don't. This is the last installment. Is titled Saving the Elf Arrow. In this final chapter, the author could have just as easily reimagined the outcomes of the Pinto design or the Deepwater Horizon disasters. The theme throughout the book is that industrial age thinking fails more often in the age of knowledge work. Final thoughts on the book? Not to put too fine a point on it, this is Marquet's most important book yet. Use the links in the show notes to read all of my final thoughts on Leadership is Language and to catch up and read along with all of the installments of our reread of Leadership is Language. Next week, we begin the read. This is my first take on this too, of Actionable Agile Metrics Volume 2, Advanced Topics in Predictability by Daniel Vacante, which is available on LeanPub, link in the show notes. Please go out and buy a copy so you can read along. We reread Volume 1 in 2018. There's a link to the first installment, which also has all of the other installments also in the show notes. That was life-changing for me. I'm looking forward to Volume 2. Learn to solve IT's dirtiest secret. I think by now you know that Jeremy Willits and I are about to have our book published. our book titled Managing Work Intake by J. Ross Publishing. It will be out on the shelves in 2024, January. It's actually going to the printer in the next couple of days. Yay! So we are also putting together a cohort-based training program. Link in the show notes. Really, tackling work entry is IT's dirty secret because we don't ever talk about it. Wave a magic wand, get a backlog. Well, you know what? It's more complicated than that. And if you get it wrong, whether you're agile or you're still doing waterfall or some hybrid, you don't get work intake correct, everything else suffers. As I continue to celebrate the impending publication of Mastering Work Intake, by the way, link in the show notes, pre-order your copy. I will continue the discussion of work intake scenarios that bedevil teams and organizations. Controlling work entry is controlling WIP, which helps us to be our best selves. We'll also have a visit from Jeremy Berrio, bringing his Evolutionary Agilist column to the cast. And this time, I actually mean it. So I know where that file is now. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many ask, are we there yet?